So the time now, 8 o'clock. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And a very warm welcome from Maximise Your Time to the CDAC Public Forum 2021, Day 2. I'm now delighted to hand over to Sangeeta Maiskar, our moderator for today.
Welcome back, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We're looking forward to you joining us on a terrific second day and last day of the CDAC Public Forum 2021, where we're examining whether technology is tipping the balance of power in aid. Wow, I mean, wasn't that absolutely fascinating? We could have just carried on for hours, but as I say, I'm afraid we have to crack on because we have so much more brilliant content to bring you, not least our first session of the morning. The question we're asking is it possible to localize from afar? Localization from afar is the title of this session. Over the last 18 months, along with the COVID pandemic, the other thing that has spread around the world is that more and more people have learned how to work remotely. I'm doing it just here in the bedroom of my house. Suddenly, jobs which in the past we thought could only be done in person can now be done from thousands of kilometers away. This is very much thanks to global digital access, using technologies for remote working, which have only just come to maturity. We can now work from almost anywhere if you have the access. Soon using by low-cost satellite internet coverage will be truly global. And community engagement and accountability work has not escaped this shift in the online world. With more affected communities going online, better remote monitoring tools, and data and feedback being shared across the world in real time. We don't need to leave our desks to know what a community is thinking. A combination of this and COVID-19 has meant that a lot of humanitarian agencies have pivoted their accountability leadership teams to work online, providing an opportunity for local leadership and community engagement and accountability to be given much more autonomy, at least for now. But is social media monitoring really the same as listening? Our data dashboards showing the full picture, and our decisions still being taken in cubicles in Geneva, New York, and increasingly at kitchen tables around the Western world? And are we really letting local actors have autonomy, or have management just retreated back to issuing directives? Wondering if any of you listening to this are recognizing this picture that we're painting for you. Joining us to discuss this is leading humanitarian advisor, Stijn Aelbers, who is the senior humanitarian advisor for Internews. He's been an advisor and leading implementer on global responses for nearly a decade. Before COVID, you'd find him flying a lot as he travels to oversee accountability activities in projects across the world. Also joining us on the panel are three people who have taken on leadership roles in their own countries over the last 18 months. There have also been recent recipients of CDAC Senior Coordinators Training, equipping people to run community engagement and coordination in national responses. Khadiga Agab was the Sudan CDAC Senior National Coordinator and now is with UNICEF. Hello, Khadiga. Khandokar Hansanul Banna is the Humanitarian Project Manager at BBC Media Action in Bangladesh. Welcome, Banna. And Samuel Kapingidza is the Regional Programme Officer for Social Protection and Inclusive Growth at the UNDP Regional Service Centre in Africa. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Stijn, let me start with you. As a jet-setting international expert in community engagement and accountability, you often say that you want to be put out of a job, you want to be unemployed. That with all of the commitments that leadership make to going local, your role shouldn't be needed anymore. Has your wish come true of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Not quite. I would actually argue that I've never been busier. and that is also fascinating to see that as a result. Obviously, there's some basic elements that have led to this. I'm working from home. I can now go start in the morning and end after midnight and go across all time zones. I'm involved in dozens of projects around the world, and it's maybe that's a positive thing. I've used to indeed jump on a plane and focus on one project and be in one place at a time. Now I can serve dozens of projects and still feel useful at times.
I'm sure you are still useful at times, Stijn. Banna, what do you make of what Stijn has just said? With the technology that we have today, is it possible that we don't need somebody like him to come in and join you on the ground? Why fly when you can Zoom?
I mean, yes, definitely. People like Stijn, we used to get him maybe once a year for a few days, but now we can get him almost every day, so whenever we need. So that's the positive side of it, definitely. So let's start with the positive notes, but I have a kind of mixed feeling that is Stijn or people like Stijn are overworked? Are they really having their time? Because in sometimes in RNRs or anything, they could have more their time. It's all now humanitarian time for people like Stijn, and maybe that has a trickle down effect for the people like us who are working in the national level. But definitely it's much more effective to have this conversation and have this communication between the internationals and the national coordinators here. Yep.
But Banna, does that impact your autonomy? So do you have less autonomy? Do you have less space because you are seeing Stijn all the time? Do you have less space to take control of your work, your situation, your decision making?
If I put this honestly, is actually what happened earlier is actually we have a meeting probably at 10 to 11 and then a 15 minutes break, and we move from one place to another place and having another meeting or having another work. But now it's basically one after another, and all the 8 hours that are we are supposed to work, it's actually meeting time. We are meeting lots of different people. In the name of being effective, we are actually spending quite a lot of time online. And I don't know, for the people who are actually working on ground, they have this implementing activities. They need to go to the people, they need to work actually the actual works. So I think we are actually having less time from the actual work than spending more time on the meeting.
Thank you, Banna. Khadija, what are your thoughts on this? How useful is it to have an international advisor like Stijn with you in person, or do you prefer it remotely? And what are your thoughts on Banna's point that actually the downside of being able to access somebody like Stijn all the time is that you end up tied to your laptop rather than doing the work that you need to get done?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it is challenging for both of us because for the advisor, he is not having the full picture as I have on the ground, and maybe he is speaking from an angle which is not be applied on the ground, where I also have an obligation to try to make him on the same page and understanding the context. So this is in general. But for me, as localization, also looking at us when we're sitting in the office and trying to also support our person of concerns in the field, also there is a challenge in this regard, because whenever you depend on your networks on the ground, the protection teams, the outreach monitoring officers over there, or your community-based networks also, it is a little bit challenging, because some of the community leaders, if they are involved in this communication with their communities, might be also biased for some ethnicities or bias to their own people. So the message might not be reached as you want. On the same time, the language barriers also is a big trick for us, so that we can make it easy and successful. So a lot of challenges during the COVID-19, or if you compare COVID-19 situation in previous, when we had emergencies in the East Darfur, in eastern of Sudan, and also in the areas around South Darfur. So there was a lot of problems, a lot of protection issues, a lot of violation, which is not reported because people cannot have access and cannot have presence on the ground to get the information or to monitor the situation and to make sure that protection is in place.
Stijn, very briefly, from what you've heard so far, do you think that the power balance is tipping? Do you think that you are very slowly and progressively being done out of a job?
I'm
kind of
not fast enough for my liking, but I think there's already a few very interesting points, of course, like the digital possibilities and opportunities have also created a workflow and expectations and a way of working that have made, like, put us like behind our laptops 24/7 almost, like what Banna referred to. I think something else that Khadiga said was also interesting, in the sense that she hinted at, like, the bias and of like locally there that might be there. And I think there is something there, and this is already maybe treading on thin ice as the representative of the whole humanitarian system here. But there's probably also value at times to come in and not being from a place. And that's maybe a thought about, like, of course, like knowing your place, asking a lot of questions, being there to support, and yet also maybe figuring out, like, how can we make sure that indeed our response is more needs driven and is indeed fair and equitable and all of those principles that we also stand for as a system.
We're talking about a level of objectivity, perhaps. Samuel, one of the things that came up a lot yesterday was talking about data, big data, huge data sets, and how they can be gathered, and the objectivity of that data. I'm wondering, given how much humanitarian work appears to rely on data, does it really matter anymore where your management sits, as long as everyone is sharing the same data? So regardless of whether somebody is in New York or Harare, it's irrelevant because you're all looking at the same data, aren't you?
Yeah, thanks very much, Sangita. It's a big question. So I would
Samuel.
I would say the context that we are living in are really yes, we have some positives that we can talk about, like my colleagues have highlighted. But I would say, in terms of data, in terms of research, what I've seen so far is there has been like it has been like a barrier to how we engage with the communities, gathering information from the community, having a close dialogue from the community. Because for me, it is not about big data or small data. For me, data is data, and I would value those dialogues that we think are very small at that community level, grassroots level, to say we are talking to the people and we hear their concerns. But as of late, we have kind of gone back to the old data, as it were, to say, what can we do? Let's work with what is available. Let's go to the database for this organization. Maybe it was a 2015 data, 2018 data, and gradually we are now being persuaded or manipulated to use some of the data that is like out of date. So what the pandemic has caused is, in a way, we can no longer have that rich conversations with our communities, be it urban or rural, because we have to adhere to the lockdown restrictions. Otherwise, we will be found on the wrong side of the law. So if you are to do the research, you have to go, like, there are protocols to follow, and the research or the dialogue may not be approved because of this context. So for me, data is data, big or small. I would find problems with big data and find more value in small data.
Interesting. Khadija, you've really been very hands-on in this area. You studied and mapped multiple community engagement mechanisms, feedback systems, and other forms of collecting data from the community. Do you think that there is a danger that this data is being analysed too far away when you can get it, instead of being more in touch with the community, which is really something that Samuel was just touching on?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Yeah, I think communities need to be consulted, and the data should be, even if there is a way of having data gathered remotely, it can be also communicated back to the communities to get it is clarity, or to make it sure or accuracy happening on the ground, because most of the actors might not be fully involved the community during the data collection itself, whether it is like self-assessment or type of needs assessment during the emergencies, or even in the normal situation. So we need to communicate this data back to the community to make sure that this is the reality and what is happening. Again, at the humanitarian and interagency level, we need to find like a data protocol sharing, because we don't need to repeat ourselves again to the communities collecting the same data has been collected by other colleagues. So this is very important to make sure that we are not getting the fatigue and reaching out to the stage of the fatigue while we are doing the questionnaire or reaching out to the communities. So I just realized that everyone is trying to do his own to report to his donors or his manager without having a common approach for coordinating this data and making sure that the output of this data collection is to be applied according to the best of the interest of the people.
Yeah, Khadija, as we've gone through the hours of this conference, I'm obviously not a humanitarian, I'm a journalist, I work outside this sphere. But what strikes me is the sense that feedback is very much one way. So, or, gathering information is very much one way. So what happens is people will set feedback forms, or they will look for specific types of data, but it's not a two-way process. There's no equality in that process. Am I right? Have I been left with the right impression that I feel as though sometimes this data gathering is almost going in like imagine a giant squid onto a community, sucking out information and then just going away? But actually, how does that leave the communities feeling?
Yeah, this is very important, because most of us are not adhering to the sorry, it is not for me.
Oh no, sorry. We'll be coming. It is for you, Khadija, and then I'll be bringing in Stijn.
Okay. Yeah,
very
thank you.
Lots of reactions.
Yeah, what we are also insisting in this aspect, we need to have a clear feedback to the communities, and it is important to close the loop, because we don't want to make it is one-way process of communication. We need to have a full two-way communication, and it is important for the communities to be involved and their views heard. And even when you close the loop and send the feedback, whether it is negative or positive, it increases the trust and building the credibility between us and the communities at the field levels. So this is one of the area I think most of us, during having or implementing their complaint and feedback mechanisms, are lost. So we need also to focus on this and to make sure that each modalities of the complaint feedback mechanisms on the ground, whether it is community outreach, hotlines, or phones, or even our presence, the physical presence, should communicate this and sending feedback to the communities.
Banna, Khadija's got a really good point, hasn't she? That if you're always extracting information from the community, but never telling them where the information goes, and they can't see it being translated into something immediately on the ground, does that open up room for mistrust and potentially suspicion?
I mean, yes, definitely this is. I just want to like extend Khadija's point. Is actually like closing the loop is really very important part of like collecting data, and some of the things that you can close the loop really fast.
What does closing the loop mean, Banna?
So sorry.
What does closing the loop mean?
So yeah, that's what I was explaining. Like closing the loop is like, for example, somebody lost his registration card. You like get that person to the proper authority and get them a new card. That's closing the loop. So they complain on something and you act on that, and immediately there are some results you can get. So my point is like there are some issues which you can solve very fast, but there are some issues you cannot solve really fast. Like there are some policy level discussion required. There are some financial involvement there. So what do we do when we cannot solve some problems? I think that's where this trust issue comes in. And one thing I don't think like we do very often is actually like what is the intention of getting this data to you. So that like you get the data, you solve the problem, and at the same time like you look at the data to get more insights that can change the modality of your organizational strategy, the way you respond to the problem. Maybe like you respond to the problem entirely different for the next instance. So if you can do that, I think that will bring the trust back from the community. But in most cases, I think like we have this pile of data to us, we close the loop, but we don't analyze that in a way that can change the strategy and that can change the policy level thing. And when you have this change, you go back to the community, talk about this issue that, yeah, based on your feedback, I changed these and now I'm doing this entirely differently. You will definitely have that trust back, isn't it?
Stijn, that sounds like a simple and workable idea. Why isn't it happening?
Well, I obviously agree. It's always about decision-making power, right? Like it starts with like the data that we collect and who analyzes it. Like that should be the community, right? Like, and maybe there's some technical expertise that we make it sound very fancy, but like, you know, what are your priorities? This is what we've collected. Does that resonate with your reality? What should we do first? Like that's data analysis. That's prioritization, categorization, and that is like identifying possible like actions that can be derived from it. That should be within the community. Obviously, the next step is, of course, also the actual, you know, who can then change the way that the humanitarian response is going. Like, I'd like to give an example, if you may, but like, if I may, but like in Cox's Bazar, recently, Human Rights Watch released a report about the data that was shared with the government. 3-4 years ago, we were in Cox's Bazar as Internews, together with BBC Media Action and Translators Without Borders, having a common service. The Rohingya refugees were telling us that. They said, like, we think they're going to give our data to not only the Bangladesh government, but also the Myanmar government. Is this true or not, right? Like, we do rumor tracking, which is basically community data collection. And yes, like, they were, like, afraid of it. So what do? We take that concern to the humanitarian agencies in charge, and they say, well, yeah, we might, but we will always do it with consent. Now, obviously, like that part of consent, everybody who works in this field knows, like you can make people sign a paper. Is that consent? What are the alternatives? Do they really have choices? And another part of consent is, of course, can that be a debate? And that's what I was trying to get at. Like nothing changed, of course. Like we collected the feedback, we brought it back to the decision makers. They gave us an answer which was plain and honest. And obviously nothing changed. And 3 years later, you know, like there's a scandal, like they did exactly what they said that they would potentially do. And so it is, of course, the next step is like, can they sit at the table where decisions are being made? If the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh would have been sitting at the table, they would have said, we're not giving our data. We're not giving our data to the government, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's also where, if we talk about that combination of accountability and localization, we have to be careful not to reduce localization to retreating and handing it over to governments as the main actor of a localization, as because we still have to maintain a level of representing values and indeed trying to shift that power a little bit locally, so we don't perpetuate a local power imbalance. And that's something to reflect on and to figure out, how close are we to governments and how much can we actually maintain those values when there's a clear demand for it from the community.
And as the humanitarian community tries to figure that out, I'd like to just bring this back, Banna, to how you're working now. Do you think that remote managers may be misled into believing that they are constantly in touch with communities on the ground and constantly in touch with what they're thinking and feeling because they're relying on data that's been gathered? Can they be given the false impression, and what impact can that have on a day-to-day basis?
I mean, I have a mixed feeling about it, honestly, that sometimes, yeah, definitely they do, because they have this experience on ground. People like Stijn, he knows what is Cox's Bazar, what is Rohingya refugee camp, and how that operates. So bring back that knowledge when he's sitting back in his home, definitely have some idea that how things are working. But the fact is, when you are out of touch, you start losing that feeling. It's the way I think. One example I can bring here is actually when COVID started, we really wanted to build capacity to the local religious leaders. So that they can be the information bearer for the community, because we cannot go to the field. So for a 30 minutes orientation to some of the religious leader, it took 8 hours to conduct that 30 minutes orientation session. So I did it, my team did it, who are on ground and who are actually doing it. But I don't think you will get the same feeling sitting somewhere 100 kilometers away, that how much struggle that we had to face during that part. So I think, yes, definitely you are getting it, but is it enough? That's my question. And I think whenever it's been 18 months, it's been 2 years that you are actually not in touch with that that community. So you start the things get fade out, I think, to some extent.
Yeah, because as Samuel was pointing out, it's a dynamic situation on the ground. Within days, let alone hours, things can change and the data can be out of date. Samuel, I know we've lost your visuals, but I'm hoping you can hear me. Can you hear me there, Samuel?
Yes, please go ahead.
One of the things that came up yesterday, time and time again, when it comes to data and digital communications, was the simple issue of language. And I wanted to ask you this. There is also the language issue. Even with very good translators, is there always a problem with understanding the culture and the way in which different words might be used and understood from place to place? And can that get lost? And can that have an impact on the data that's gathered and then the analysis that's done back at base, which is now people's kitchen tables?
Thanks very much. Language is very important. Language is very critical. We are a very diverse world. The communities we work with are so diverse. But as you may be aware, there are dominant languages, even over the so-called indigenous languages. We have, if we go back to history, because of colonialism, we have kind of made the languages for our colonial masters the official languages. But then because of, education and, literacy, our communities, most of our communities, especially in rural areas, may not be very much fluent in these languages, English, French, etc. So what happens, I think you all are aware that a lot, of course, we have trained translators in some instances, not in all the instances. So I think you're also aware that a lot is lost via translation. And in the COVID context, there are some issues that we discovered that, especially when we're doing the burial, like we have some cultures, they have their own practices. And so you would find that as an outsider, you might lose, especially on understanding how people, how a community does its things, because you don't speak their language, and then they also don't speak yours. You are relying on another person, a third party, to do the translation. And translation is not always 100%. So I remember in another case, it was the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's a very diverse country, many languages, many tribes, but research was done in French. So there were issues to say, this word in French means this, but in local language A, it means one thing, local language B, another thing, local language C, another thing. So it becomes a very complicated issue, and we lose a lot in terms of getting an in-depth understanding of how people are experiencing humanitarian issues and how people expect to be supported or assisted. But as for now, we continue to rely on translators. So I hope and wish that if our curriculums would like try to make them, multilingual, to have like many languages in the schools, so that at least people get to speak or communicate in many languages.
Samuel, thank you very much indeed. And it's not just our panelists that we want to hear from on this issue. If you have any comments or questions for them or even for each other, please make sure that you leave those comments and questions in the chat. We would love to see them. We've got a couple of comments coming through. I'm going to be bringing those to you and the panel a little later on. But like yesterday, we would like to introduce one of our expert witnesses. Samia Kumri has worked throughout the Middle East and North Africa in humanitarian responses. And she has her own thoughts about why humanitarians like to retain control rather than share it. She starts by describing her experiences.
I've been working in the humanitarian sector for over 15 years. So I'm focusing on the Middle East, specifically Jordan. I work, my experience falls within the forced migration, working with the refugees, the Iraqi refugees and the Syrian refugees. It's simple. Our ego, the power, ceding power, power of and bureaucracy. Exactly. Why not hire people from the local? The local meaning the affected people. Why we bring these tech people hire with the salaries that could cost per person thousands? I'm happy to say it's an achievement in one of the camps that I worked with, that how the system was created. There's a system inside how people are being hired from the community. They are being hired and recruited by international organizations, and they rely on their designs, on their solutions, on their ideas. So the ideation part. So it's true. I know I'm a humanitarian. I'm a researcher originally. I'm called an investigative researcher. So I investigate information. I go and seek solutions, how to get the easiest, because I used to work the traditional way, but now I get information, available information, which is available by the seconds, not by the minutes. But I can't write it because I have to investigate that information. So apart from engagement, give them ownership and their decision. I'm happy to see that one of the camps I worked with, they are relying now on refugees to build apps, to come up with their own solutions. And more they are being hired and recruited from the community by international organizations. They used to work as volunteers. They used to work part of cash for work. No, they have now salaries. They are hired by international organizations. So it's let's abandon these terminologies. I mean, there's ego, there's power, there's bureaucracy. I don't know till when we will keep having this or breaking this hierarchy. Things are coming from the ground, and things are from the ground, and people from the ground, from the community themselves, they are finding their own solutions. They are deciding what they need, what they want. They are running the camps. I'm not saying they are running as there's a power struggle. No, side by side, it's agencies plus, not equal, but plus the community itself.
Samia Kumri there, who's worked throughout the Middle East and North Africa in humanitarian responses. Stijn, Samia is very clear in her view that ego is what's stopping the sharing of power between leadership and communities. Is she right?
No doubt that ego plays a role, but I'm always a little bit wary of, like, giving these kind of like personality traits as the overall explanation. I think the ego is, like, there's obviously a problem with that, but it's institutional when it is about keeping control over the delivery. I think I hear in her, what she's saying also, how it's of course the big salaries, but it's also like, if we think about what localization means, it's not just having implementing partners, I think. And it's a little bit that what it touches upon as well. Like, it's not enough that you work through implementing partners and slap your logo on everything, and then, get the biggest salary and be able to, showcase all of the good that you're doing around the world, which, of course, inflates your ego, feels amazing. But like structurally, that is, of course, problematic, because is that really where, like, the next step that we want to take? Is that really decolonizing our design, our aid? Like, it still feels very colonial, if you ask me. And so that's about that relationship between still where the money is coming from and where the decisions are being made. It should definitely not be those big egos, I would say.
Banna, what are your thoughts?
I mean, yeah, let's take a look like how this problem started and how we can solve this. Is actually like when we are saying that, okay, community people needs to sit on the decision making, and that's localization, like at the very end. Like, are we giving them enough capacity? Because like if I pick someone from the community and put them into general assembly like speech, maybe that person can deliver that speech, but it's not a kind of capacity that local community representative is having. So I think like when we are saying that we needs to this like we want this localization to sustain, then I think the real question is, are we actually having this right kind of capacity we are providing them step by step or not? Because like you can be representative with someone picking someone into the table and like let them speak for one decision making, but that's not a kind of sustainable change. And if I like understand localization correctly and the aim of it, I think like it's more about having this conversation, picking up this local community in a more sustainable way, and like so that like okay, maybe for this year I am doing a project for Rohingya response, being a Bangladeshi national. I don't have the right language skill, or I don't have the right, probably like not 100% contextual understanding. But from the next year, a Rohingya community person like herself or himself will be a manager for the project. Like, are we really doing that? And I think like if we really want to make localization sustainable, we need to start thinking about that, and we need to start putting the right capacity step by step, so that like you cannot be a manager in day one. You have to have follow the process. So I think like following that process and picking the right people and like putting them into the track is really important. Otherwise, like this localization, we will be speaking about this localization for years after years, and there will be some local NGO representation, maybe some local community voice we will be hearing in the bigger forums, but that will not be a kind of sustainable change. And I think we should really start thinking about that.
Khadija, do you think that there is value in Samia's view that it's the humanitarian ego that's preventing, for want of a better phrase, the decolonization of humanitarian work? Or, like Banna and Stijn suggest, do you think there are also more practical issues on the ground that are the bigger problem? I think we've lost Khadija. Khadija, can you hear me? If you can, will you raise your hand? No, I'm sorry, guys. We've got a lot of unstable internet connections today, but I think I know where we're going with this. And I think broadly speaking, those are the two arguments, I guess. I would like to bring you both some comments and questions from the audience, if that's possible. Samuel, you've just joined us at the point that I'm bringing you some questions and comments from the audience. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Perfect. This first one actually is from a panelist that we had on yesterday, Anahi Ayala Ayakuchi. She says, is localization a way to give more power into the hands of the local organizations and communities, or is it more of a way to offload risks to the local actors while still retaining control and resources, i.e. money, back at headquarters? Can I read that to you again? Is localization a way to give more power into the hands of the local organizations and communities, or is it more of a way to offload risk to the local actors while still retaining control of money and resources back at headquarters? Samuel.
Thanks very much. I can see Banna is laughing. And,
again, giving you the big question while I have you.
All right. I would say it's practically it's both. It can be both practically. It depends on who is doing it, the motives, and but I think from my experience working in a humanitarian context, that's exactly what I mean. The second option to say we can say we are localizing, we are getting the power of aid to the people, but you know who pays the piper calls the tune. There's that saying. So those with their monies, they'll still retain their controls, and they still retain their interest in the ways we do. And I know. I mean, we always get templates from those who own the money. They give us the template. Say you follow this template. The template never come from the community. It's from, so we are like in between. Are we accountable to the communities, or we are more accountable to the sources of funds? So the ideal way, which makes more sense, is the one to say control to the people, to the communities, and let's address their interests. Let's really work with them as partners, not as beneficiaries. But we are still a long way to go that direction. For now, it's interest and control. It still belongs to those who fund the humanitarian interventions. So said, but that's the reality on the ground from my experience.
Okay, so we've still got quite a lot to get through. We're going to be asking the audience to vote. We've got a poll coming up. But before we do that, so I'm going to ask for very brief answers from Stijn and Banna for the next two questions. Banna, very quickly, do you have any comments on what Samuel's just said?
I mean, yes, definitely. Like I also have this kind of mixed feeling, and there are both sides of it. But the fact is actually like this is the real question that like we are having, like whether we are there to implement a project and fill out some templates to get back. But even if we don't do that, will we be able to get the next funding? So I think like we like there is a crack we are falling in the middle, and like we need to really think that like how we can be filling out the existing formats, because that is really important for us to get going. But at the same time, following the process, how can we be more inclusive, like in a true meaning that like people are having the right power, people are having the right skills, and like they will come back and they will be in the decision making table.
Got it. Stijn,
Yeah.
we've got, sorry to interrupt you. Stijn, we've got a question here from Johnny Fisher, which I'd like you to answer as briefly as possible. Johnny says, what happens with the next generation of senior global leaders if we stop traveling? Does it lead to us extracting the local experts from their own contexts to bring the cultural awareness to headquarters? I'll repeat that question from Johnny Fisher. What happens with the next generation of senior global leaders if we stop traveling? Does it lead to us extracting the local experts from their own context to bring the cultural awareness to headquarters? Stijn.
I think I can understand there's one thing that is having contextual awareness at headquarters level, like as a goal, that there's enough expertise and but the answer to that is probably not to fly me around. The answer is to have more diversity in headquarters and to have more vertical, like, like people moving up the chain. And we know that there is a big problem between what, like national level staff and how hard it is for them to actually get to that international level. I don't think the answer is to have me like, consuming massive amounts of kerosene, but like actually making sure that all the expertise that is there, because every time we do startup projects, and like Banna was referring to, like it's not something that it starts on day one, but like you build up that capacity. But then the next level, like beyond the project level, that's a very big step to make, as probably everybody here on the panel can also testify that that's so the diversity and the expertise should come from bringing the diversity into the headquarters, rather than having me as a middle-aged white man flying around the world, I think.
Okay, so if you are listening to Stijn's answer, you'll be very interested in taking part in the poll that we now have for you. We'd like to ask you, if you're listening into this conference, what you think. And the question that we're posing to you is, new communication technologies have enabled increasing remote working in humanitarian action. So, should there be less travel by senior humanitarian management? Here's the question again. New communication technologies have enabled increasing remote working in humanitarian action. So, should there be less travel by senior humanitarian management? You can vote right now by using the Slido vote button in the chat column on the right of this window. And we can see your results immediately. So get pressing, get voting. While you do that, without wishing to influence the vote in any way, I'm going to ask the delegates whose internet connection is still stable enough what they would vote. So Samuel, starting with you, the question, new communication technologies have enabled increasing remote working in humanitarian action. So should there be less travel by senior humanitarian management? What do you think?
Exactly. That's. I think there should be less travel by this humanitarian senior management, and there should be more activity. I mean, on the ground with communities and with those. A low-level staff, more interaction with the communities. I think that's the best way to go, because some of these travels would blow the budget without really much output. So in the period that we are living, I would go for less travel by senior humanitarian management. Thanks.
Banna.
I think if the travelers come to like visit the spaces, then definitely like there should be less travel. But there are some requirement for the senior management to come, because like that's how you build capacity. That's how you share your like experiences. Because like as I mentioned, that people like Stijn, when I work with him closely, definitely I'm learning new things every day. So if that's because of the learning purpose, definitely I should say like it should be same as before. But there are a lot of travel which is for visiting only. I don't think like that's very necessary, and like please reduce that, because that's create more stress on people like us and people like who are working on the ground.
And also, it's terrible for the environment. If you don't need to do a long haul flight, don't do it. Here in the UK, we've got the COP26 conference coming up in a month's time. It's the thing that everybody's talking about. We need to start reducing air travel, don't we, in order to maintain the planet if it's not necessary. Stijn, your vote. How would you vote if you could?
Less travel, for sure, for sure. But I do want to now like counter that argument a little bit. And thanks, Banna. Like you've given me a little bit of a leeway, but like I've been in a number of cases where like I was remotely supporting teams, and they would tell me, well, the literacy levels are very low, so we can't hire like a diverse staff. They would tell me that everybody speaks like fill in the gap, but like Newari or Bangla or even Chatka, or like there is things that happen when you are actually from a context where it sometimes helps to have outsiders' views, and it's very hard for me to make that point when I'm not there. When I'm there, I can point towards like, hold on, like maybe there is ways around this as an outsider, not because I'm like so amazing, but because I'm an outsider, I think I can bring that different perspective. And it's not always easy to do that from afar, because I basically am cut off of the right arguments, the examples that I will find on the ground, where I can say, hey guys, like maybe if we do it different, we might have like a 50-50 gender team rather than only men, as I've encountered when I landed in a place where we previously said that it was impossible to hire 50% women, for instance.
Guys, if you're listening in from as a delegate, please have a listen. Please take a look at this poll. I'm going to give you another sort of 20 seconds to vote. The question you can see up on your screen is: new communication technologies are enabling remote working and humanitarian action and making it easier. Should there therefore be less travel by senior humanitarian management? It's very easy to vote. You can see the button, you just have to press it. You've got 3 options there. Welcome back, Khadija. We re-established your line. We're asking the question, should senior humanitarian management fly out less to locations, given we now have ease of communication? What are your thoughts? No, I don't think she can hear us even now. Right, I think I'm going to call it an end to this vote. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We've taken your votes. The poll is closing. The answer to the question, should senior humanitarian management fly less frequently out to location, given the technology that we now have, an overwhelming 76% of you have voted for less travel. 14% of you say same as before. And surprisingly, 10% voting for more travel. Very briefly, guys, Stijn, what's your reaction? Are you surprised? Are you not surprised? I tell you, I'm quite surprised by the more travel.
Yeah, the 10% is intriguing. I would love to hear from them, actually. I think we need to travel less, like for sure. Like that to me is like very clear. I'm probably gonna say that some travel will still be useful for a number of reasons. But like hopefully, like that is well thought of and not a knee-jerk reaction to jump on planes.
Yeah. Banna, your thoughts?
I mean, the people who voted for more travel probably like they like had this context of COVID for past 18 months that we couldn't travel. And that's why, like, yeah, some travels are necessary. I do agree with Stijn. And like when I have Stijn in like in an online call, I get him for 30 minutes or 1 hour. Maybe that's not necessary. Like that's not like serve the purpose all time. There are evening chats. There are many more engagement than this when you have like meet like experienced people physically. So I would say, yeah, that's maybe because of COVID that people put more
Good
travel.
explanation. If the person or the people that voted for more travel would like to leave their comments in the comment section, I'd love to read them out. Khadija, we've been struggling with your internet connection. Can you hear us now?
Yeah, I'm clearly hearing you. Yeah, so I also prefer that the assumption of getting less travel, since there is like a good connections, a good presence on the ground. There is no need to have more resources to be invested in traveling and arrangements and logistical part of travel as well.
Well, there we have it. Thank you very much, everyone who's been listening in and taking part in that vote. It leaves me only to say thank you to Khadija, Stijn, Banna, and Samuel, who we lost along the way. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you. I do have one more question, though. Stijn, have you heard anything today that persuades you that you're out of a job, you're about to lose your job?
I mean, systems change very slowly, so I'm not immediately worried. But I do think my job has changed and should change. That's for sure. Yeah.
Okay, well, we've got Samuel back. Samuel, I was just thanking you all for taking part. I know it's been a bit of a struggle with internet connections, but we really do appreciate the time you've taken here for the CDAC conference. So once again, Samuel, Khadija, Banna, Stijn, been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. I hope we get to do it again. Do stay in touch. In the meantime, if you're listening to this, we're going to be taking a quick break so that you can refresh yourselves. Please be back in around 20 minutes as we'll be starting our last session looking at the limits of technology for accountability, how we can ensure that the digital divide doesn't silence the most vulnerable. See you back in about 20 minutes. Bye-bye.